So we like to start with a bow. So welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. And we're working our way through Volume 1 of The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa. Today we're up to, what's the chapter number of this? Chapter 41. We're covering the four foundations of mindfulness, they're called. They're somewhat different than the traditional foundations, especially as they're presented in the Theravada tradition, where they are the foundation of mindfulness of body, and feelings, and mental events. What have I left out? Body, feelings, mind. Mindfulness of mind and mindfulness of mental events. And here what we have is mindfulness of body. Trungpa Rinpoche presents this. Life, effort, and mind. And we're up to the third, which is effort. But I thought I'd really review the first two before we get into the third mindfulness, the mindfulness of effort. The mindfulness of body really has to do, see what body is anything that arises as an object of mind. It could be literally a body, it could be a physical object, but it could also be a mental event. It's anything that one encounters in one's experience in this present moment. In the present moment we have the six knowables, which are the objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind, mental events. And these are objects, these are the objects of your mindfulness of body, because what body means is that you're aware of this thing that you encounter in your experience. The thing might be literally a physical object, but it doesn't have to be. It could be mental as well. And in fact, the 8 consciousnesses, if you're familiar with those, are also objects of mindfulness of body. So we might become aware of the 7th or 8th consciousness. The 7th consciousness is that aspect of mind that conceives of a self, of an I. And the 8th consciousness is that sense of history that we carry around with us. We may not be thinking of all the different aspects of our history, but they're back there. They're kind of a feeling of the me-ness of me. And occasionally, since I'm going to mention your mother, now she pops to mind. She comes out of that, the 8th consciousness, where you store your memories of your mom, and she becomes an object of awareness, or the thought of her does. And all of these are the objects of body. It's really a matter of realizing that what meditation is about is to become aware of all of your experience as it presents, as it arises and presents and passes away in the present moment. This is mindfulness of body. So body is in the broad sense. It's not just my body, but it's all the bodies out there too. It's the very physicality and presential quality of the universe. The second mindfulness is mindfulness of life. And really what this amounts to is that we begin to appreciate mindfulness altogether. That we begin to realize that when we're lost in thought, it's kind of like being half dead. We're just not here. We're not appreciating our lives as they unfold alive. Rather, we're thinking about the past and the future. And so mindfulness of life becomes really a love of mindfulness altogether. That mindfulness is what brings us back to our lives. I remember back in the old days, this will date me, but people would have bad trips on LSD. And maybe there's some people here who are old enough to have done that. And what it amounts to when you have a bad trip on acid is that you're completely lost in a mental construct, a construction of your mind that the drug is heightened and has intensified. And you've lost track of what's actually happening in the present moment to a large degree. You're living in a very, very intense dream world that's created by the drug. But we can do this without drugs. We can do this in our daily lives. So what mindfulness is coming back from this kind of death, a semi-death, the death of being lost in thoughts about the past and the future, which are always fraught. They're full of anxiety. We're regretting the past. We're wishing we could have the past again. We're pissed off about the past. We're thinking about the future, being very hopeful for the future, being fearful for the future. It's always driven, those thoughts, by anxiety about me and my welfare. And every time we exercise mindfulness, we cut through that fog of dream and come back into the present. And we're coming back to life. It's like, I remember when people had bad trips on acid, you'd look at them and they would go gray. The blood would drain from their face and they'd be tortured. They'd be lost in thought. You could call their name and they might not hear you because they were so lost in thought. And then as they got over it, you could watch the flush come back to the person's cheek and the light to their eyes as they came back into the present moment. Well, we can do this without the drugs. We can see this in people. Especially, you can see it in people who are going through mental illness, coming in and out of that. But we all do it, even people who are not mentally ill or extremely mentally ill. We're sort of all healthy neurotics, I assume, here in this room, as psychotherapists like to call us. But we do that all the time too, and you get lost in anxious thought about the past and the future. You leave. One leaves. And mindfulness brings us back to life. And this is the second mindfulness, the mindfulness of life. It's beginning to actually love mindfulness. And the world can become much more vivid and meaningful as we begin to shift our allegiance from these anxious thoughts to mindfulness, to awareness in the present moment. I've said many times, you watch it at Datun. That's the month-long meditation practice that we, students of Trungpa Rinpoche, have done for years. And you can watch that people after a certain period of time, usually sometime around a week or 10 days in, start telling their meditation instructors that they're experiencing heightened vividness of colors. And that's because they're coming present a lot more. They're cutting through the veil of thought. Thought is like wearing sunglasses. It grays things out. And when we begin to take those off with the tool of mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, the world actually lights up. The third mindfulness is the mindfulness of effort. And normally we think of effort and we think of some effort to improve ourselves. And when we do that, we have this negative idea of our state of being and how we want to make it better. And so there's this contrast going on between the way in which we see ourselves or our world and the way in which we want our world to be. And so there's a movement forward. This is being lost in judgment, lost in thought, lost in evaluations. And this is the wrong kind of effort. The right kind of effort is the effort of coming back mindfully into the present, of remembering to wake up. It's like we're thinking, and suddenly you realize you're thinking. Now, a number of things can happen at that point, especially for beginning meditators, and I class myself in that after 50 years. You can realize that you're thinking and say, Dan, I've been thinking for the last 20 minutes. I've been having this argument with my lover, my friend, my enemy. I've been lost in combat, and I haven't been here, for my breath, for the world, for my shrine, for my location, wherever I happen to be. And you beat yourself up for it. And that's wrong effort, because that's another thought. It's another dream. Now you're going into the dream of self-criticism and self-improvement. Right effort is full of fundamental confidence. The confidence that allows us to be just what we are in this very present moment. It's saying that we are awake already. It's being lost in thought, going off into these dreams that makes us fall asleep or fall out of reality. That our fundamental nature is to be awake, to be mindful, to be enlightened, actually. And so when we realize that we've been thinking, there's nothing more to do. We have already demonstrated our fundamental wholeness, our fundamental Buddha quality, just by being aware that we were thinking. We've been just like a Buddha, like Shakyamuni. We've come back to utter awakeness, the awake of seeing the fact that we were thinking. And there's nothing more to do. There's no self-criticism. There's no self-improvement beyond that. Rather, there's a complete relaxing. He calls this, term from Rinpoche, I'm not sure if it's in this section. I think it's in a different section. But he calls this practice of right effort, or mindfulness, the mindfulness of effort, touch and go. The touch is you wake up and you say, oh, I've been dreaming. The go is you wake up and say, I've been dreaming. You see, touch and go, you're touching the dream, and you're going to awareness, but they happen at the exact same moment. There's no sequence involved. You've already awoken as soon as you realize that you're thinking. So it's this tremendous act of giving up self-improvement. That is a huge thing on the Buddhist path, on any path, whatever you want to call it. It's a tremendous virtue to give up this imaginary self-improvement, like I'm going to become a Buddha, give it up. And it's just coming back to awareness. It has this quality of ease, of relaxation, and basically a fundamental confidence in being just who we are. I am, you are. Of that confidence that you can, oh yeah, there's nothing more to do than to be aware of what's happening in the present moment. And if you think there is a little more to do, like, I got to make myself a little better than that, it has this yucky quality to it, this heaviness to it, this feeling of not delight, of heaviness and slightly of sorrow, depression to it. And the depression is, I'm not there yet. If I try harder, I will be. So really what right effort is just waking up, and that's it. Again and again and again, coming back to what? To whatever is going on, to what's going on in your mind, in your body, in the room around you, in the world around you, whatever it is. You come back out of dream, and instantaneously that's done. It's touch and go, and they're simultaneous. You touch, you go, you're no longer lost in the dream. That's the go part. The touch part is realizing that you were dreaming, and they happen at the same time. And the very fact that they do happen at the same time is the mark of utter confidence. Confidence in being just who you are. I am. He says, if we're being hard-working, like we're going to get better, I'm going to really work hard at this, and every day I'm getting better and better. Like that old thing. He says, being hardworking is based on developing appreciation or joy in the practice. If there is less effort to create effort, then effort becomes self-existing, without an external trigger or incentive. It just happens. This switch, the wake-up. He says, exertion, or virya, this is one of the bodhisattva virtues, paramitas, virya, is the unceasing interest in sitting practice and in awareness practice in general. Unceasing, because what we're doing is we're coming back to life every time we do it. Like that person who was on the bad acid trip, and then they come back from being lost in this very painful mental place, and you can see the flush come back to their cheeks and sparkle to their eyes. You're not looking for entertainment. He spends some time with this one. You feel completely secure and grounded with your own boredom. This is particularly workable if you have developed regular daily, weekly, or monthly practice. You just relax into it. Because then you begin to find it easy to relate with the effort. He says, by developing a regular physical routine, this is the routine of meditation, you can bring about a psychological change. You experience a glimpse of awareness coming to you. And I promise you that if you meditate regularly, and at the same time, what I recommend is that you do some chants, and we could get into that here in the morning. And you will find that you can sit down on your cushion in the morning at the same time, or roughly, and you can start doing this routine where you ring the bell. I really recommend having a bell, a gong to ring. There are places you can get one. And you ring the gong and you start with that first chant, whatever it might be. I do the 4 Dharmas of Gampopa. And it's like a curtain comes down, opens, goes away. It's like, it's Pavlovian. It really is. Like I'm one of Pavlov's dogs, that I start to wake up. And then after a while I go back to sleep again, but so what? It's amazing that to experience that Gil, you must know this, you've been practicing a long time, that there are things that you can do that you become habituated to that just wake you up. And then they lose their power, but then it comes back again. For me, it happens almost every day. Let's see what else. He says meditation is a discipline. You don't have to be subtle or delicate about it. You could just do it in a very peasant-like way. Just do it, he says. You sit and breathe. Gentility does not apply. And finally, I'll just read this last paragraph. He says, the mindfulness of body introduces you to what actually happens in your experience of body and breathing and your mind. The foundations of life, effort, and mind introduce you more and more to large thinking. So studying the 4 foundations is a way to create a total picture of mindfulness. So we have the very solidity, the earthiness of the mindfulness of body, that it's right here in the present moment. We have the delight of beginning to realize that we can come back to life and experience this world in a more vivid way. That's the mindfulness of life. And finally, we have the beginning of the development of enormous self-confidence, that every time that we realize we're thinking, we're already back, and we can just be who we are without trying to make ourselves into some ideal, some imagined idealistic better person. There is no such thing. And that way lies the perversion of the Dharma, actually. Then we want to become a super person, superman, superwoman. So that's all I have to say about this. I'm encouraging everybody to experiment that with this idea of touch and go, that when you sit, at the instant you realize that you were daydreaming, you were thinking, you're back. Nothing more to do. And you watch yourself doing something more. And that something more always has the quality of judgment, of ought or should. And it has this feeling of heaviness to it. And the more that you let that go and just come back, the more delightful the practice becomes. And you can do it not just while you're sitting, but all the time. You're walking down the street, lost in thought, and then you realize you're thinking, nothing more to do, you're back. You could do it in daily life, too. So we could have a discussion, if you like. We'll pass a mic if people want to speak. You have something, Richard? You look like it. No. Gil. No.
I've got nothing to say.
Nothing to say?
Nothing to say.
Okay.
You make it sound so easy.
You know, that's the funny thing. It is. I remember Trungpa Rinpoche looking at us one time and saying, the reason you don't get it, he said to us, is because you don't realize how easy it is. Everyone thinks it's so much harder. You know? And the texts are full of injunctions for us all to take the path of ease. I mean, in the Dzogchen teachings, there are two main practices, and they're both extraordinarily profound. These are the great perfection teachings of Buddhism. And Trekchit, they call it the lazy person's path to enlightenment. And I told the group here, there's this a bodhicitta that I learned from a teacher that I'm studying with now. It's connected actually to a 14th century Nyingma yogi. And here's how it goes. It goes, ho, so that all sentient beings, so that all sentient beings may be released from temporary confusion. Temporary confusion, the word is trulpa. Trulpa literally means error. And the error is that I think I have to do something. That's the fundamental error, that there's a me who has to get better. So that in order that all sentient beings may be released from temporary confusion, I shall, and self-liberate. See, that's what happens when as soon as you touch a thought, as soon as you realize you're thinking, the thought self-liberates. It goes poof, it just evaporates like mist. So in order that all sentient beings may dissolve temporary confusion and self-liberate, go poof like that, in the wisdom awareness of perfectly pure, original basic space. That's what we're sitting in here. This is the original basic space. It's always here, this space. I shall cultivate the bodhicitta, the awakened mind. That's what bodhicitta means. I shall cultivate the bodhicitta of resting in great placement. Great placement is awareness of this. Resting. If the emphasis again and again is on resting, it's like it's a matter of developing trust and confidence that we don't have to make ourselves over. That, like right now, you're just listening to me. You don't have to do anything more than that. That's it. You come back to that kind of awareness again and again. You're present. And then you think, you'll go off and think, and then you come back. Yeah. It's amazing how the higher you go in the teachings, the more the emphasis is on effortlessness. And true. I mean, everybody who studies Mahamudra and Dzogchen here, and the emphasis again and again is on effortlessness, because we are coming back to what we already are at our fundamental core. And when we depart from that, when we go off into effort, it always has the quality, it's all about self-improvement, which is imaginary and perverse. So thanks, that was a great comment, question, whatever.
This is a little anxious.
Hold the mic up to your mic.
A little anxiety talking about this for me. I knew you a dozen years ago, and I was a pretty earnest.
What?
I was a pretty earnest Dharma practitioner, and then I had a terrible accident, and for 12 years I was unable to feel my body. It was
Really?
a semi-state of paralysis.
Is this between the time that I knew you and
Yeah.
now? No
Yeah.
kidding, Gil,
Yeah.
wow.
So it's only in the past year that I've been able to sit up and kind of, pay attention to the world again.
Huh.
But my experience was very interesting.
It's working.
Is it working?
Yeah, it is working.
Because during that time I couldn't feel my body. I had nothing to ground my mind. This is the monastery, so to speak, and without a connection below the neck, everything, all the energy of my body sort of rushed into my head. That's where I lived for those dozen years. And so mindfulness of body and mindfulness of effort and four foundations are what I come back to at the end of it all. And that effortless quality is still there. It's still, it's working its way through, but I can feel it kind of, gradually settling the mind down, because it's not strenuous effort to get back to some place, but some kind of relaxing into, the process of mind, the way we were taught, rather than trying to, make the mind into something it's not. So I'm just very grateful for the talk tonight. I thought it was spot on for me.
Oh, Gil, that's terrific. Wow, what a teaching. Wow. I'd like to hear more at some point, but golly, it's amazing what we go through in this life. What people do and you don't know. Well, I'm certainly glad to see you here. Yeah, you look good. Lane.
Yeah, it's on. John, I was wondering if you could speak about the word neurosis, which Trungpa Rinpoche liked to use so much. Because
Yeah.
I think we have the preconceived notion that it's something negative. When we talk about neurosis, we naturally think that we need self-improvement. But that's obviously not what Trungpa Rinpoche is recommending. So I'm curious if you have any deeper understanding of exactly what he meant by that word.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, I just want to come back to what Gil said, that the way body is used in this context is not limited to the physical body. I remember once Trungpa Rinpoche was giving a seminar up in Allens Park, Colorado. And, this is back in the hippie days, right? And we were in this outdoor pavilion. It had a roof but no walls, and the floor was dirt. And he was sitting on a little stage, maybe 4 feet, that had been erected 4 feet above the ground. And during the Q&A, he was sitting there and he had a cigarette in one hand and a glass of scotch probably in the other, as he always did. or so often. And everybody was, in those days, so many people were into macrobiotics and health foods, and there were health food stores in Boulder, and yoga and yogis and all this. This guy stands up, and he says to Trungpa Rinpoche, this is in the Q&A, "Your body is your temple. You're defiling the temple." The guy says to Rinpoche. Rinpoche's sitting there like this, and there's a dog that is walking, it's open air. I mean, we had no walls, and it was dirt floor, and a dog is walking across in front of the stage. And Rinpoche leans down, and he starts barking at the dog. Woof! Like this. Woof! He's barking for a while. And then he looks up at this fellow, who's still standing there, kind of nonplussed, I guess, and he says, "The whole world is my body." And I really think that that's the sense in which mindfulness of body is meant to be taken. It's not just of this literal body, it's of the whole world is my body, he says. It's just so beautiful. I mean, I've thought about that so many times over the years, When you give up ego, the whole world is the body, So, I'm sorry, what was the question again about that you were? Oh, I know, you were talking about neurosis. Rinpoche felt, wherever Buddhism has gone, this is very interesting, that wherever Buddhism has gone in the world, Tibet, China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, it has found a culture that is congenial to translating it. So when Buddhism went to Tibet, it met up with Bun, and it incorporated many of the native Bun deities into the Vajrayana pantheon. And when Buddhism went to China, it encountered Taoism. And it had a very difficult entry into China, largely because of the linguistic differences between Sanskrit and Chinese. Sanskrit is a language that's highly inflected, meaning you can get tune it to very precise levels of meaning. And so it's very geared to expressing things very precisely, like philosophy or even science. Whereas Chinese is almost totally uninflected. So it makes it very unsuited to expressing Abhidharma philosophy, Madhyamaka, Yogacara. It just isn't there. And what it is good for is poetry. Ancient Chinese is terrific for poetry, way beyond what Sanskrit is. It's a gorgeous experience reading it. So when Buddhism went to China, it took for about 400 years for the Chinese to really figure out what this was. I'm not kidding. There was a famous translator in the 4th century, somewhere in the 400s, named Kumarajiva, and he was probably the first translator. He came, an Indian who came and learned Chinese, who started getting it right. Before that, they thought, that Buddhism was teaching the truth of a self, an ego, an I, an Atman. There was all kinds of mistakes. So, and then it went to Japan, and it met the Japanese culture head on and translated itself, from Chinese into Japanese culture. When it came to this country, Trungpa Rinpoche felt that the existing culture that was most congenial to Buddhism was Western psychology. That it best translated all of these Sanskrit and Tibetan words. So words like Atman, in Sanskrit, the idea of a soul or a self, becomes what? Ego, a Freudian term. And it went on and on like that. And neurosis is the word for confusion, which is usually a translation of either samsara in Sanskrit, or korwa in Tibetan, or it can be a translation of avidya, not seeing, which is often translated as ignorance. And so neurosis, he actually used it as kind of a gloss for the way in which we take the fundamental error, the trulpa that I mentioned before, which is the error of concretizing, in the Yogacharans did a lot with this. They said that the fundamental error is that suddenly, we're in this middle of this open space full of lights and colors and things, constantly moving and flashing around, and suddenly, in the middle of this, with nothing to grasp onto, because everything's changing instantly as you look at it, as somebody looks at it, but suddenly there's a concretization that goes on. There is a figure that emerges as though it exists. There's Richard, or that blue shirt. And it emerges from the ground as a figure against the ground. And when that thing seems to exist, it implies the existence of a perceiver here. And this is the beginning of the fundamental error which builds into full-blown neurotic mind, neurosis. And then there's a whole description of this. In fact, there are a number of descriptions. There's the 5 skandhas. There's a description of how it elaborates. There are the 12 nidanas. There's the whole scheme of the ayatanas and the dhatus, in the Abhidharma. And the Yogacharans did a lot with this, the Yogacharan school of philosophy, and that it started in the 7th century AD in India. So neurosis is generally, he used it, I think, as a word that describes just the whole Megillah of being unenlightened, the whole catastrophe, of everything that arises as unenlightenment. Anybody else have ideas about this, Alan?
That seems right on.
Okay, I thought.
To me too, thank you.
Seems like it's right on? Yeah. And it's wonderful to study all this. He makes a big point that we should really study suffering and neurosis. Wait till we get to these chapters. We're doing it for another class, that on the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, chapter 52 in the Profound Treasury. Read it. It is stunning. It's an amazing chapter on the truth of suffering, the first of the Four Noble Truths. The subtlety. I'll give you an example, a thing that blew me away. There are different schemas for describing the first noble truth, which is the truth of suffering, right? Dukkha, Duknel in Tibetan. And there are different schemas, and one of them has to do with these 4 things that the Buddha, when the Buddha first left his palace at the age of 30, he got his charioteer drove him out of the palace, outside the palace. He'd been kept in the palace all that time. He was 30 years old. He had a wife. He had a child, son. And one day this charioteer takes him back, and what does he see? He sees a corpse. He sees people toiling in the fields. He sees people who are ill. This is the 4, in this first pass at suffering, this is the first 4. It's birth, old age, sickness, and death. These are the 4 in this first version. There's some other versions of what suffering is. And then he talks about birth. It just was so exquisite. What he says about birth, the baby's in the womb, enjoying swimming around in the amniotic fluid. It's comfortable. And suddenly, it's being forced down the birth canal. Doesn't want to. It was comfortable in the womb, but now it's coming down the birth canal, which is in itself painful. And then it comes out of the mother's body, out of her vagina, and it's coming out into this cold, dry air. And it's crying, and it's made to cry because it has to breathe, and they have to clear all this stuff out. And it's suddenly, what's happening is that it's going from this warm, delightful environment into this new one, which is painful and which requires an adaptation, a tremendous adaptation. This is something that we have happen all the time. You create a little nest for yourself. You find a lover, a partner, and you set up a household, and everything is swimmingly great. And then you find out what? They're ill, and they're going to die, or they're cheating on you, or you're dying, or you've lost all your money and can't afford to be with them anymore. Something's changing, and it's forcing you out of the womb into a new circumstance. We encounter this all the time, this problem of birth, the suffering of birth from where we thought we were comfortable, we had it made, then into a new situation where we have to start all over again. Yes, sir. So read the chapter, and then it's just knockout.
Well, it occurs to me that's where effort is involved. The effort of yanking yourself away from the womb of your fantasy world. The effort of yanking yourself away from your favorite memories or hopes and fears. I mean, it's amazing how attached we can be to painful memories. That for me takes effort. But yes, I think the more practice one becomes in making that effort, the actual process of sitting down and being present does become effortless as time goes by. But for me, there's always that sometimes reluctant jolt from being absent to being present. And then as the meditation begins to seep into one's life, that practice becomes more of a natural thing. And then when Rinpoche speaks about the delight, we can start to take delight in meditation practice. Yeah.
So yeah, coming out of the womb over and over again, that takes also confidence that we could do it, right?
We lost that, Mike. There must be batteries running out, but
Yeah, it takes the confidence that we could do it over and over and over again, continually, right?
Right. And he emphasized confidence so much. You know, that he said that self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin. That's a quote. And confidence, the confidence of the warrior, right, in the Shambhala teachings, the cosmic confidence. He emphasized that so much. And that people who had that kind of confidence were ever kind and generous to each other, and they built beautiful castles and planted crops and raised beautiful crops and fed each other. Whereas the people who lacked that confidence, who constantly felt that they had to improve things, went out and killed each other and ate each other's flesh, he said. I think of that quote from the letter of the Black Ashe. So yeah.
About the Siddhartha's venturing out with his charioteer.
Yeah.
I have a theory about that.
Oh, yeah?
Or I guess my own. I mean, it seems hard to imagine that a person went through infancy, childhood, teenage years, and young adulthood being imprisoned in a palace.
Without showing any kind of curiosity.
About, I mean, there must have been some awareness of inside and outside. You know, that seems kind of basic. So
My idea is that, yeah, he did venture outside. I mean, there's a story of himself as a child when there was a festival, a harvest festival, and his parents, the whole retinue went to the fields to celebrate, and he, as a child, he saw the workers toiling with the oxen, the way the plow, turn up the earth, and he had his first glimpse of the suffering of these little beings in the soil being killed by the sharp blade of the plow. And then there's another story of the Buddha as a child sitting under a tree, and suddenly or gradually he's just overcome by a sense of, I don't know, you know that story. I think he's sitting under a cherry tree. Yeah. So my idea is that he went out a number of times, but this particular occasion that's told about, he gets it, you know?
Finally sank in.
It finally sank in, you know. The veil was lifted, and he saw what was going on in the world. He saw the suffering. He saw birth, sickness, old age, and death. That's my idea about that story.
That sounds probably right. Yeah. Well, maybe we should end on that note about the Buddha. Oh, by the way, there's a new book that I just got hold of. And it starts out with that story of the Buddha. It's by Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche. And it's something about living is dying, or dying, you know? And it's for free. If you go to the website, Siddhartha's Intent, you can download this book. It's by Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche. And it's a PDF, and it's a 300 page book. And it's all about death, and how to live and how to die, especially how to die, which is certainly a subject we can all study. There's some wonderful books already in print, but Dzongsa Khyentse is such an unusual teacher, and that I'm looking forward to taking a look at this book. Just started it tonight. So you can download it for free. He's giving it away. It's terrific. Okay, so let's dedicate the merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.